There are moments in life that look ordinary when they happen. No raised voices. No sudden movement. Just a sentence that lands, quietly, and stays. For me, it happened in a conference room with glass walls and a long white table. The kind of room designed to make everyone feel transparent. There were pastries laid out. Coffee already poured. People settling into their seats with polite smiles. I had not planned to speak. I was there because my sister asked me to come. She said it would be good for me to see how things worked now. That was her way of being kind. Or careful. I never fully knew the difference with her. He was already seated when we arrived. The billionaire. Calm. Relaxed. One arm resting on the back of his chair as if the room belonged to him, but not in a way that felt aggressive. He didn't need to claim power. It gathered around him on its own. When I spoke, it was measured. I asked a question about a document I had reviewed the night before. A discrepancy. A timeline that did not align. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at him directly at first. The room went still. He smiled in a way that suggested concern rather than irritation. He turned slightly, enough for everyone to see his face. And then he said it. "I think we should be careful here," he said gently. "She's been under a lot of stress. Some people don't handle complex environments very well." He didn't use the word crazy. He didn't have to. Someone laughed softly. Another person nodded, relieved. The tension released, redirected. Not toward the question but toward me. My sister didn't look at me. She adjusted her pen. That was all. I felt the familiar sensation then. The one I had known since childhood. The feeling of being discussed rather than addressed. Of being reduced, politely. I didn't argue. I thanked everyone for their time and sat back. That was the day I understood something important. He wasn't just dismissing my concern. He was defining me. And once a person like him defines you, the room follows. My parents never said they favored my sister. They didn't need to. Favoritism does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes in patterns so consistent they become invisible to the people who benefit from them. My sister was praised for her confidence. I was advised to be more careful. She was encouraged to speak. I was told I was intense. When she succeeded, it was evidence of her brilliance. When I succeeded, it was luck. Or timing. Or help. At family dinners, she was asked about her plans. I was asked if I was happy. That distinction matters. One implies a future. The other implies uncertainty. When we disagreed, my parents framed it as temperament. She was practical. I was emotional. Even when my points were factual, even when I had proof, the conclusion was already written. She means well, my mother would say. She worries too much, my father would add. It was never framed as dishonesty. Just instability. Over time, I learned to speak less. To present facts softly, if at all. To anticipate the moment when my concern would become an inconvenience. My sister learned something different. She learned that alignment brought safety. That approval was a form of protection. Neither of us chose these roles consciously. But we grew into them, the way children grow into rooms they never designed. By the time we were adults, the story was fixed. She was the reliable one. I was the difficult one. And stories, once settled, resist revision. My sister did not become the golden child by being cruel. That is important to say. She became it by being agreeable in the right rooms. By understanding instinctively what people in power wanted from her. She listened. She adapted. She made herself useful without appearing threatening. When she entered professional spaces, doors opened. Not because she demanded entry, but because she seemed safe to let in. I watched this happen from the edges. She was introduced with warmth. I was introduced with context. "This is my sister," she would say. "She's very thoughtful." Thoughtful was the word people used when they were unsure what to expect. As her career advanced, she began to orbit wealth and influence. Events I had only read about. Names I recognized from headlines. She never bragged. She never had to. And then she met him. At first, she spoke of him with admiration. His discipline. His generosity. his attention to detail. She said he took her seriously in a way few people had. I noticed what she did not say. She stopped asking questions out loud. She started checking her phone before answering. She began to measure her words, even with me. When I raised concerns, she smiled gently and told me I didn't understand how high-level environments worked. You see danger everywhere, she said once, not unkindly. Not everyone is out to control things. I let it go. I always did. Because when the golden child speaks, people listen. And when the scapegoat warns, people wait for proof. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives early, takes the seat closest to the center, and waits. That was his way. When he entered a space, conversations adjusted without instruction. People leaned forward slightly. Laughter became more careful. Phones disappeared from hands. Not because he demanded attention, but because attention had learned to gather around him. He never raised his voice. He rarely interrupted. When he disagreed, he did it with questions that sounded reasonable enough to accept. When he dismissed something, he did it gently, as if sparing the other person embarrassment. That is why people trusted him. He remembered names. He referenced past conversations. He donated publicly and generously. His reputation was not built on intimidation, but on reassurance. You felt safe disagreeing with him, right until you realized the disagreement had been reframed. By the time you noticed, the room had already moved on. I watched him carefully. Not with suspicion at first, but with awareness. I noticed how he placed ideas into conversations and let others repeat them as if they were their own. I noticed how he praised people who echoed him, and quietly sidelined those who asked for clarity. He did not punish dissent. He simply redirected it. When he spoke to me, it was always polite. Sometimes even warm. He would ask about my work, my interests, my health. Especially my health. Are you managing your stress? He asked once, smiling as if concerned. At the time, I thought it was kindness. Later, I understood it was positioning. The silence did not arrive all at once. It came in delays. Texts that went unanswered for a few hours. Then a day. Then longer. Invitations that were forgotten. Plans that were postponed and never rescheduled. When I asked if something was wrong, my sister reassured me quickly. Things are just busy right now, she said. You know how it is. I did know how it was. That was the problem. Busy did not explain the careful tone, or the way she avoided specifics, or how she began to redirect conversations when I asked about her work. When we did speak, she sounded rehearsed, as if she were explaining herself to someone else in the room. Once, I heard movement behind her voice. Papers shifting. A door closing. Are you alone? I asked. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough. Yes, she said. After that, our conversations stayed shallow. Weather. Travel. Logistics. She stopped confiding in me. Stopped asking for my opinion. When I expressed concern, she laughed softly. You always think something is happening, she said. Sometimes nothing is happening. I wanted to believe her. But I had lived long enough to know the difference between distance and withdrawal. And this was withdrawal. I tried to speak to her once more, carefully. We were seated across from each other at a cafe. Neutral ground. Public enough to feel safe. Quiet enough to talk. I told her I felt something was wrong. I said I was worried, not about her success, but about her isolation. I asked if anyone was limiting her choices or discouraging her independence. She listened without interrupting. Then she smiled. You're projecting, she said calmly. You've always struggled with control issues. The words were precise. Familiar. Not hers. I didn't argue. I nodded. Paid for the coffee. Changed the subject. After that, I made a decision. If speaking made me unreliable, then I would stop speaking. If concern was interpreted as instability, then I would become unremarkable. I attended events and said little. I listened. I observed. I noticed who deferred to whom. I noticed which conversations happened in hallways rather than rooms. I noticed which documents were shared verbally, never in writing. And when something didn't sit right, I wrote it down. Quietly. Privately. Without commentary. I did not know yet what I was preparing for. Only that silence, when chosen, can become a form of control. And I needed some of my own. I found the first file by accident. That matters, because intention changes how people judge motives. If I had been searching, they would say I was looking for trouble. If I had asked questions, they would say I was digging where I did not belong. But I wasn't searching. I was organizing an old external drive. Years of work projects, archived contracts, forgotten drafts. I was clearing space, deleting duplicates, naming folders properly for once. That was when I saw it. A document labeled with my sister's initials and a date that did not match anything I recognized. I almost deleted it. I opened it only because the timestamp bothered me. It predated an announcement I remembered clearly. One I had attended. One where timelines were presented with confidence. The document was not dramatic. No threats. No confessions. Just a sequence of approvals and revisions that did not align with the public narrative. At first, I assumed there was an explanation. There usually is. But as I read more carefully, I noticed language that felt deliberately vague. Responsibilities described without names. Authority implied but never stated. It was the kind of document written to survive scrutiny while revealing very little. I did not panic. I did not call anyone. I saved it in a separate folder and closed my laptop. That night, I slept poorly, not from fear, but from recognition. I had seen this kind of writing before. It was the language of insulation. I did not bring up the file right away. Instead, I made the mistake of raising concern without evidence. It happened at my parents' house, over dinner. Casual. Familiar. The kind of setting where truth is supposed to be safe. I said I was worried about my sister. I said she seemed controlled, isolated, pressured to perform. My mother sighed. My father leaned back in his chair. "You always do this," he said calmly. "You turn success into something dark." My sister did not defend herself. She did not need to. "She's fine," my mother said. "You just don't like that she's doing better than you." There it was. The conclusion, fully formed. I tried to explain that this was not about comparison. That I had concerns based on patterns, not jealousy. My sister finally spoke. "You see danger because you need there to be danger," she said. "Otherwise, you'd have to accept that you were wrong." Wrong about what, she didn't say. The conversation ended politely. No shouting. No slammed doors. But the verdict was clear. Concern was now character flaw. Silence would be interpreted as growth. That night, my father called me into the kitchen and spoke quietly, as if offering advice. "You should be careful," he said. "People are starting to worry about you." It was meant as kindness. It felt like a warning. The wedding was elegant. Expensive, but tasteful. The kind of event designed to photograph well from every angle. I arrived alone. My seat was at the edge of the room. Not separated enough to complain. Not close enough to matter. From where I sat, I could see my sister clearly. She was radiant. Composed. Perfectly positioned beside him. He stood when people approached her. He spoke for her when questions drifted too close to detail. He kept a hand lightly at her back, not possessive, just present. During the speeches, her achievements were praised. Her resilience. Her discretion. Her loyalty. My name was not mentioned. That omission was not an accident. At one point, someone at my table leaned over and asked, kindly, "Are you all right? You look a little tired." I smiled and said I was fine. Across the room, he looked directly at me for the first time that evening. Not with anger. With assessment. He raised his glass slightly. A gesture so small it could be mistaken for politeness. I understood it clearly. I was being seen. And I was being placed. I left early. Quietly. No scene. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I had avoided admitting for a long time. This was no longer just family dynamics. This was strategy. After the wedding, I stopped trying to be understood. That choice brought relief before it brought clarity. I no longer explained myself at family gatherings. I did not ask follow-up questions when answers felt incomplete. I did not offer opinions unless asked directly, and even then, I kept them narrow and factual. People responded well to this version of me. My parents relaxed. My sister sounded less defensive. Invitations returned, cautiously, as if testing whether I had learned something. What I had learned was not submission. It was observation. When you stop reacting, patterns reveal themselves. I began noticing who always entered rooms together, who spoke first, who summarized conversations afterward, subtly reshaping what had been said. I noticed how decisions were framed as consensus when they had clearly been made in advance. I kept notes, dates, phrases, context, not because I planned to use them, because memory, when isolated, can be rewritten. Documentation cannot. I still did not think of myself as someone preparing for exposure. That felt dramatic, unnecessary. I told myself I was protecting my own sanity. But somewhere beneath that justification, I was building a record. The call came late. I almost ignored it. We had not spoken meaningfully in months, and I had learned to respect distance, even when it hurt. But something in the timing unsettled me. She did not greet me when I answered. "I don't have much time," she said quietly. Her voice sounded different. Not frightened. Controlled. As if she were reading from memory. She told me she was exhausted. That expectations had become constant. That every decision she made now felt reviewed, revised, approved. I asked her if she was safe. She paused. "I don't know how to answer that," she said. She spoke about contracts she did not fully understand when she signed them. About non-disclosure clauses that extended into personal life. About being advised, kindly, firmly, not to involve family in professional matters. "They say it's for protection," she said. "For everyone." I asked her who they were. She did not answer. Before I could push further, her tone shifted. "I shouldn't have called," she said. "I just needed to hear your voice." Then she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. Not angry. Not shocked. Just certain. I returned to the folder the next morning. The first file no longer felt isolated. It felt incomplete. I searched methodically this time. Not through my sister's records, but through public filings, archived emails, shared drives I had legitimate access to from past collaborations. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want stolen truth. I wanted verifiable truth. The second file appeared in an email thread marked Final. The language mirrored the first document almost exactly. Same vague authority. Same strategic ambiguity. The third was a contract addendum. Short. Legal. Efficient. Together, they told a story that none of them could tell alone. A story of influence disguised as mentorship. Of compliance framed as opportunity. Of silence rewarded with advancement. I did not feel vindicated. I felt steady. Because patterns, once confirmed, removed doubt. And doubt had been my greatest weakness for most of my life. I backed everything up. Multiple locations. Physical copies. And then, for the first time, I considered something I had avoided for years. This might not end privately. I chose the lawyer carefully. Not because I wanted aggression, but because I wanted precision. I did not need someone to validate my feelings. I needed someone who would test my facts without dismissing me. Someone who understood power not as spectacle, but as structure. When I sat across from her, I did not begin with a story. I began with documents. I placed them on the table one by one. I explained where each came from, what it claimed, what it avoided claiming. I spoke slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I had learned that speed invites interruption. She did not interrupt me. That alone felt unfamiliar. She asked questions that were narrow and exact. Dates, jurisdiction, language. She did not ask why I felt uncomfortable. She asked who benefited. At one point, she paused and looked at me directly. You understand, she said, that this isn't about one bad action. I nodded. This is about a system, she continued. And systems don't collapse emotionally. They collapse procedurally. She told me what the documents could prove, and what they could not. She explained the difference between moral concern and legal leverage. She did not promise justice. She promised clarity. When I left her office, I felt something shift. For the first time, I was not carrying this alone. Before anything became public, I studied his reputation more closely. Not the headlines, the patterns. He was praised for generosity, but always with visibility. Awards followed donations. Boards followed philanthropy. He aligned himself with institutions that conferred credibility, not scrutiny. His language was careful. He spoke of empowerment without specifying autonomy, of opportunity without defining exit. People described him as demanding, but fair. That phrase appeared again and again. What it meant, I realized, was that he expected loyalty and rewarded compliance. Those who stayed within his framework thrived. Those who questioned it quietly disappeared from relevance. No scandals. No dramatic falls. Just erasure. That was why exposure had to be exact. Emotion would be framed as instability. Anger would be framed as resentment. Only records would stand. Only facts would survive his calm. The invitation arrived without explanation. A corporate event. Closed attendance. Strategic review. My name was included as a guest. Not a participant. A witness. I read the email twice. This was not accidental. Someone had decided I belonged in that room, even if no one had said why. I did not ask questions. I prepared. I reviewed timelines again. Cross-referenced documents. Noted where authority shifted from implied to explicit. I did not plan to speak unless asked. But I knew something had changed. Rooms like that do not invite uncertainty unless they are already questioning something else. When I entered the building that day, I felt calm. Not because I was confident of outcome, but because I was finally aligned with the truth I had been holding quietly for so long. And alignment, I had learned, is its own form of stability. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to slow this down. Because stories like this are often misunderstood. People imagine a single brave moment. A speech. A confrontation. A sudden collapse. That is not how power usually breaks. More often, it loosens quietly. A document circulates. A question is asked twice instead of once. Someone stops defending and starts listening. If you've ever been the one who saw something early, something others dismissed, you'll understand this part. There is a long stretch where nothing seems to change. Where silence feels like failure. Where you wonder if restraint was a mistake. I wondered that too. I had been called unwell. Dramatic. Overly sensitive. I had watched my sister be praised for qualities that required her silence. I had been seated at the edge of rooms designed to celebrate alignment. And still, I waited. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the truth to arrive intact. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told that your calm concern was instability, I hope you stay with me. What happened next did not restore my past. But it did restore my clarity. The files did not come from me. That distinction mattered more than people realized later. They appeared online late on a Tuesday night. No announcement. No commentary. Just documents uploaded to a forum known for industry transparency. Emails. Contract language. Internal memos. Redacted carefully. Verified quickly. By morning, they were circulating in private group chats. By afternoon, journalists were asking for confirmation. He responded exactly as expected. Calm statement. No denial of authenticity. No admission of wrongdoing. Just concern about misinterpretation and context removed from collaborative processes. My sister did not comment. I watched the coverage quietly. Not with satisfaction. With attention. Language matters in moments like this. At first, headlines were cautious. Questions raised. Documents surface. No allegations confirmed. Then the wording shifted. Patterns identified. Board reviewing materials. Legal counsel engaged. I did not celebrate. Because justice, when it is real, is rarely cinematic. It is procedural. And it is slow. What changed first was not his position. It was his certainty. He stopped appearing in public for a week. Then 2 statements were issued by representatives instead of himself. People who once defended him without hesitation began qualifying their support. I don't have all the facts, they said. We're waiting for the review. Those phrases are small, but they matter. The story was no longer about whether something happened. It was about what could be proven. And proof does not care who controls the room. My sister called me once during that time. Briefly. Carefully. They're asking questions, she said. I asked who. The board, she replied. That was all she said. I thanked her for telling me. And when the call ended, I realized something that surprised me. For the first time in years, I was not waiting to be believed. The process had begun without me asking for permission. My sister released her statement on a Friday afternoon. That timing was not accidental. Late enough to limit immediate reaction. Early enough to shape the weekend narrative. It was measured, legal, and careful in ways I recognized immediately. She did not accuse. She did not name him directly. She did not describe harm in emotional terms. She spoke instead about professional pressure, blurred boundaries, and expectations that extended beyond role definition. For most people, it sounded vague. For those who understood contracts, it was precise. She acknowledged that certain agreements had restricted her ability to speak freely. She confirmed that documents circulating publicly were authentic. She stated that she was cooperating fully with internal and external reviews. And then, near the end, she included one sentence that changed everything. I regret not listening earlier to concerns raised by my family. She did not say my name. She did not have to. My phone began to ring almost immediately after the statement went live. Distant relatives. Former colleagues. People who had once smiled politely while avoiding eye contact. No one apologized outright. They asked questions instead. That was enough. The board meeting was not dramatic. There were no raised voices. No sudden exits. No confrontations worthy of film. There were binders. There was silence. There were pauses where people reread paragraphs they had skimmed before. I was seated along the sidewall, exactly where a witness belongs. Close enough to hear everything. Far enough to avoid influence. He arrived late. Not because he was careless. Because he still believed the room would wait for him. This time, it didn't. When he began to speak, he was calm. Familiar. He contextualized. He reframed. He emphasized intent over impact. Then the questions started. They were not hostile. They were surgical. Why was this clause added after initial approval? Why were reporting lines changed without board notification? Why were personal communications routed through professional accounts? Each answer created space. Space where confidence thinned. I watched something rare happen. The room stopped orbiting him. Power, I realized, does not disappear when challenged. It redistributes. Near the end of the meeting, legal counsel addressed the board. She summarized findings. Not conclusions, yet. Just verified facts. Then she referenced a timeline of internal concerns. And she said my name. Not with emphasis. Not for drama. As a matter of record. She stated that I had raised early questions regarding inconsistencies. That those questions had been documented. That they aligned with materials now under review. No commentary. No character assessment. Just facts. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. For years, I had been defined quietly as unreliable, emotional, difficult. In that moment, I was none of those things. I was documented. And documentation, when spoken aloud by authority, does something powerful. It restores proportion. It came in steps that were easy to miss if you were waiting for spectacle. First, there was a leave of absence, framed as voluntary. Then a restructuring announcement. Language about realignment and new oversight. A few weeks later, his name was removed from 2 boards. Quietly. No press release. Just updates on institutional websites that required searching. There was a settlement. Details were confidential, as these things often are. But the existence of it mattered more than its terms. It meant the documents held weight. It meant the questions were not theoretical. I did not feel triumphant. I felt settled. Because justice, when it is earned, does not need witnesses to feel real. My parents called together. That alone told me something had shifted. They spoke carefully. Not defensively. But not apologetically either. They referenced the news. The statements. The reviews. My mother said she wished things had been handled differently. My father said he hadn't realized how much pressure I had been under. Neither said they were wrong. I did not correct them. Instead, I told them what I would accept going forward. Clear boundaries. No reinterpretation of the past. No expectation that I would minimize what had happened to preserve comfort. They listened. Not fully. But more than before. Sometimes progress looks like restraint on both sides. My sister and I met months later. Not to reconcile. To acknowledge. She did not apologize in the way stories often promise. There were no tears. No sudden closeness. She told me she was learning how to speak without permission. I told her I was learning how to stop explaining myself. We did not resolve everything. But we did something quieter. We agreed on distance that felt honest. Not punishment. Not abandonment. Just space where neither of us had to perform a role we had outgrown. People often ask what I lost. They assume there must have been a cost. A price paid for speaking without shouting. For waiting instead of confronting. But the more honest question is what I kept. I kept my sense of proportion. I kept my language. I kept my name. I did not have to become cruel to be believed. I did not have to perform pain to prove it existed. I did not have to trade dignity for validation. If you've stayed with this story, you may recognize something familiar. The long stretch of being doubted. The pressure to soften truth so others can digest it comfortably. If this resonated with you, take a moment. Not to react. Just to notice what you've been carrying quietly. Sometimes acknowledgement begins there. What I kept most of all was my ability to walk away without rewriting myself. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it reassures. Sometimes it calls concern instability and labels restraint as weakness. But power, real power, is limited by records. By process. By people willing to wait until facts can speak clearly. I was never silenced. I was delayed. And delay, when chosen with care, can become strategy. The last thing I learned in all of this is simple. You do not need to be the loudest person in the room to be right. You do not need to convince everyone. You only need enough truth, held long enough, for authority to recognize it. If you're listening and you've lived in the shadow of someone else's certainty, know this. Your calm is not absence. Your restraint is not weakness. And justice does not require revenge to feel complete. It requires alignment. And that, finally, I have.